One of the things that really scares me is it's not just that people start thinking things haven't got better, because they haven't, that's just a fact. The really scary thing is that failure feeds into people thinking things can't get better. So I might as well roll the dice. I might as well vote for some really extreme people.
Why are you actually an optimist?
So I've seen policy make a big difference. Britain's got catch-up potential.
So we could feel a lot better relatively quickly.
Yeah, let's stop messing it up.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week is certainly a big thinker. Torsten Bell was one of those bright young things who helped run the country behind the scenes in the last Labour government, where he worked in the Treasury and then as an advisor to the then Chancellor, Alistair Darling. He then ran policy for Ed Miliband at the Labour Party when Ed Miliband was the leader, became the chief executive of the Resolution Foundation think tank, and is now a Labour MP for Swansea West. He's one of those few people who people often sort of speculated would become an MP, who ended up doing it. But before he became an MP, he wrote a book called Great Britain, How We Get Our Future Back, which is your big ideas on how to transform a gloomy and failing Britain into something that works. And actually, I mean, in response to the sort of the make Britain great again, your aim is to make Britain normal again.
Wouldn't you like that? Wouldn't that be a better Britain to live in right now?
Well, what do you mean by that? And tell us, what's the prize?
Well, look, the prize in lots of ways is, look, Britain has got big challenges right now. I'm mainly coming at it from an economic perspective, but there are others. But my argument at the back of the book is that a normal Britain is a really great place to live. And there's lots of grounds for optimism, not just because Britain's good at lots of the things that the 21st century economy will be about, but actually we just think about the big problems facing us. We're a low growth economy and a high inequality economy, and the two together are big problems. But if we, for example, take the average GDP per capita and the average inequality of countries we used to consider ourselves similar to, so France, Germany, the Netherlands, Australia and Germany, not the uber rich America and not the kind of very, very equal Norway, but countries we think of ourselves as similar, all of which are now richer than us and all five of which are more equal than us. Well, if we just had the average income and inequality of those countries, a typical household in Britain would be £8,300 better off. So I'm saying that as a keep your eye on the prize. Sorting ourselves out, becoming a more normal economy measured as against similar-ish economies is transformational.
I mean, that in itself is surprising because we still compare ourselves with those economies and think we're the same, but you're saying we've fallen behind.
We're miles behind.
Over what period of time?
Well, different ones with different countries, but Britain, since the financial crisis, has been a very low-growth economy. We used to see the economy grow by about 45% over 15 years. But since the financial crisis, we've managed GDP per capita to around about 4.5%. So 1/10 of the growth we used to see. That is what stagnation looks like. And no, this isn't some abstract thing where everyone says who cares about GDP per capita. You really should, because wages, for example, in Swansea have basically not grown across that entire period. The same is true across the United Kingdom as a whole. That is what economic failure looks like. And that is happening in the last 15 years that we've been living through on the back of the high inequality that we've inherited from the 1980s and the early 1990s, when inequality shot up and has stayed high ever since. And the two together are what make things so grim for middle and lower income Britons.
Because, I mean, we often hear that refrain of, inequality is getting worse. And you say it's not. But that it's bad.
It's just too high. Income inequality, the big problem is it is far too high. We're the most unequal large economy in Europe. Bulgaria manages to do even worse, but I don't think we're measuring ourselves against Bulgaria. Almost all of the countries we would compare ourselves to now are more equal than we are. Yes, the US is more unequal, but it's also far, far richer. So as I say, more normal means both being richer and being more equal.
The political narrative at the moment is very gloomy, and it has been for quite a while, that things are bad, they're going to get worse, it's all going to be painful. I mean, just explain sort of how I mean, you're saying they are gloomy, aren't you? I mean, you're saying things are bad.
Yeah, things are really bad. The reason why the political discourse feels gloomy it's not because some kind of political strategists have come up with a cunning thing. It's because the country feels gloomy. People are having a tough time and they want things sorted. And one of the things we've got in the book is actually a survey of the British public saying, how great is Britain doing? We're called Great Britain. We're unusual. Most countries don't have an adjective in their title, but most people think Britain doesn't feel great. 75% of the country doesn't feel like Britain is doing great. And that is all political parties, whoever they vote for, rich, poor. Actually, interestingly, and against my expectations, the old are actually gloomier about Britain than the young, despite the fact that it's very clear on the economic data that the old are doing relatively better than younger generations.
Yeah, and I mean, you say that older people are, the least optimistic about the future, but they are definitely better off, and there is this sort of now very clear gulf between the young and the old. And you're arguing, against generational wars.
We live as families across generations. My parents supported me a huge amount in terms of looking after our kids when they were born. I hope they'll expect me to look after them when they are older. That's what happens. That means financially, it means in all kinds of other ways. So people don't think in terms of generational wars, and I don't think they should. My view is that we do need to understand the changes that have happened. So we need to understand that poverty has moved from in the 1990s being a story of very high child poverty and very high pensioner poverty. Whereas child poverty has stayed stubbornly high, particularly amongst larger families, pensioner poverty, it's a good news story over the 25-year view. It's come down very significantly. It's about halved over those periods. That's happened for a whole host of reasons. Bigger private pensions. So we've got like the really good DB pension people coming through now. More pensioners doing some work. So they've got earnings at the same time. And you're seeing poorer pensioners were protected during the 2000s by pension credit introduction, and then more recently by the triple lock. So policy choices plus wider changes have made pensioners better off. Younger people have had a really rubbish time. And if the book is not written from a party political perspective. In terms of young people's incomes and wages, the slowdown starts in the 2000s. It predates slightly the financial crisis, not by much. But when I look back now, and as you politely mentioned at the beginning, I was in the Treasury when banks were going bust. Thank you for the reminder. But we didn't notice until too late that slowdown in wages, particularly for younger people, and that's got worse, if anything, during the 2000s. And those international comparisons you mentioned at the beginning, if I look at what's happened in the United States, so everywhere's done worse in general since the financial crisis amongst advanced economies, right? In the US, they've seen slightly better growth than us, and the growth they have seen the benefits of that have more gone to younger, I'm talking about under 40s, right? Younger generations. In the UK, what we've seen is really weak growth and only a very small fraction of that going to younger workers in terms of their incomes, more of it going to older workers. So the problems emerging before the financial crisis, it's got worse in terms of incomes for younger generations since the financial crisis. And obviously the big one everyone talks about is home ownership, where we've seen this, millennials at age 30 were half as likely to own their own home as baby boomers were at the same age, and people really like owning their own home.
Yes.
I think you might have heard of this. So people are having a tough time, but it's not just that, it's also pensions. Assets in general have become harder to build up for younger generations.
I mean, so given all of this, we are basically a stagnant country with generational, unfairness and great inequality. Why are you actually an optimist?
I mean, there's a number of reasons for that. One is I've seen policy make a difference. So if I look back across these last 25 years, and I look at one particular policy, the minimum wage, introduced against opposition from the Conservatives, but who then came around to the policy later on, but also the CBI at the time, a radical idea at the end of the 1990s. I think it's just worth thinking about the scale of what that policy has done. So for a full-time worker on the minimum wage, if the minimum wage had just gone up in line with prices since it was introduced in 1999, rather than doing what it actually did, which is to go up much faster than prices and much faster than wages. Remember, for 25 years now, the lowest earners have seen the fastest pay rises. Okay? That's the opposite of what we saw the 25 years beforehand. That is driven entirely by the minimum wage. What does that mean to an average worker a full-time worker on the minimum wage? Well, £9,000 a year. They're earning £9,000 a year more than they would have done if we just left the minimum wage at its level in 1999 in real terms. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Now, the fact that we haven't managed to get inequality falling, despite that huge thing, should be asking us other questions. But that policy has made a massive, massive difference to low earners. And that's not the only one. I mean, auto-enrollment into pensions, another big triumph that's transformed the number of people, particularly lower earners, saving into a pension. So I've seen policy make a big difference. Secondly, as I said, Britain's got catch-up potential. It's like being the person, I spend a lot of time rock climbing because I'm a sad person. That's my hobby, what I did before I got into politics and didn't have any time. When you first start rock climbing, you start trying, you've got catch-up potential. So you get better a lot faster. Well, I'm long past that point now. I'm plateauing. But we have got a lot of catch-up potential versus other countries.
So we could feel a lot better relatively quickly.
Yeah, let's stop messing it up.
Because, you mentioned a couple of success stories there, but what you also identify in the book is the fact that in a very complex system of government, we also make a mess of things. So the same people who benefit from the minimum wage have been disadvantaged by a freezing in the tax-free earnings threshold, which was sort of put up by the coalition government to a sort of big dramatic high, and that, they said, we're going to take low earners out of tax, and then basically they've been eaten into again over time and sort of put that policy into reverse. So doesn't every good thing end up being screwed up by something else in a very complex
not every
system?
good thing. That's a bit depressing. No, I'm more optimistic than that. Look, you're giving one example of where the tax system, if I look at the Conservative time in office, and again, I'm not making part of the political point here, but if you look at what's happened to the tax system over those 14 years, what you see time and time again is a policy implemented and then almost totally reversed. So you give them one example, which is the personal allowance increased drastically. That was the landmark policy of George Osborne in 2010. He said, I'm going to cut all these public services, but don't worry, you can have some big tax cuts. For people, that meant raising the personal allowance, and for corporates, it meant a lower rate of corporation tax. On both those fronts, we ended the Conservative times in office exactly reversing the George Osborne policy. We got back, and that is because you had people making politics, not making what are the long-term right decisions for the country. Because they were like, okay, I need to have a story about lower taxes today, even though taxes obviously weren't going down because the VAT rise happened at exactly the same time in 2010. It's also because one thing you see, and you're seeing it now with the Conservative Party leadership election, is that a lot of Conservative thinking is just stuck. It's just stuck in what did we used to think in the 1980s. That's when Margaret Thatcher was popular. We think people used to like us then, so maybe we should just keep saying the same things we said then. So they keep saying, well, lower taxes. But, Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak, it's not like they were massive socialists, but they raised taxes. And they raised taxes because there was upward pressure on spending for two big reasons. One is because they'd cut public services to the bone beforehand and they were all collapsing, so you couldn't exactly cut them any further. And debt interest payments have gone up very significantly over the last 5 years. So they've had to raise taxes to deal with that. But because they can't be open about that, you end up with this mess where you're kind of like, okay, well, we'll just quietly reverse the policy that George Osborne did 10 years before and then wonder why the public think this is all a mess.
Do you think it's possible to break that basic dishonesty around tax, which affects all the main parties?
It depends what you mean by dishonesty. So if you mean, is it possible to say, look, taxes have gone up quite a bit, which they have gone up very significantly. You're here, you know that everyone paying those taxes knows their taxes are going up. It's definitely, I actually think we probably are getting to a place because the public all know that now. So politicians saying, oh, no, we got your taxes down, aren't believed. It doesn't even matter if they say it. So the honesty is kind of coming because the public have...
But that's bad, isn't it? That's because the public don't believe politicians. When politicians say, we won't raise taxes on working people, they know that, okay, that might mean...
Well, they know taxes have been raised on them. And let's just step back a second. I think one of the things to think about is, why does it feel so hard at the moment? So I think the problems the country has mainly have economic roots. The problems that causes, though, aren't just economic, right? They are really economic in the sense that poor families can't afford the basics, and that's why we see food bank queues growing in our country that we should never be seeing happening. It's why we see over 11% of British teenagers now saying they're skipping at least one meal a week. And in Portugal, it's 2.6%. Okay, and Portugal's a lot poorer than us. So that's where it's showing up as the economic sphere in a really tangible way that's terrible. But in lots of ways, we should be as worried about, and this is, I think, what you're getting at, is they're showing up in the political sphere too, because people's faith in the system is undermined when they see outcomes that are this poor. Like, what holds system? Like, we're not a country held together, I don't think, by deference anymore. I hope not. We're not a country held together by shared religion, particularly. In social democracies, which is broadly what Britain is, or at least aspiring to be, we're a country held together by the prospect of moving forward together. Shared prosperity is what we are about delivering, and that's what we've stopped delivering, and that's why we then turns up in the political sphere as a loss of faith in the system. And that's bad. And actually, one of the things that really scares me is it's not just that people start thinking things haven't got better, because they haven't, that's just a fact. The really scary thing is that failure feeds into people thinking things can't get better. So I might as well roll the dice. I might as well vote for some really extreme people. And in lots of ways, I think this government, but also what I'm calling for in the book, is to say, look, that is the danger. The danger is that you've got an economic problem, but this feeds into a societal and a political problem, and we must deal with it. If people don't think the potholes will get fixed, and they don't think their area will get better, then you will start seeing dangerous politics. And that's what, in the end, that's the really scary stuff.
I mean, is that why you've become a politician? I mean, you've been a civil servant, you've been a political advisor, and now you are an MP. Do you feel you can make the most difference as a politician?
I don't know is the answer to that question. We'll find out. I mean, I'm very new. 10 weeks in, I don't know.
Because you were probably very powerful as a special advisor, weren't you, in terms of actual policy? You could change what was going on. I mean, more than you can as a backbench Labour MP.
I don't know. We'll find out. I mean, we'll find out if I'm any good at politics. We'll find out. I mean, I hope I can be. That's why I'm trying. But I actually think it's different. It is different being running a think tank to being an MP or trying to help a government. It involves different things. Thinking as an individual exercise generally. Politics is definitely a collective endeavour, and you've got to understand that if you want to be good at it. And, I've got a lot of work to do in terms of making sure I'm supporting my constituents, often who are having really tough times. So those are different, and we'll find out whether I've got the skills to do those. But, I mean, I've seen it. The people that have meant most to me in my career, people like Alistair Darling, who we sadly lost last year, but was the politician that, everyone always says, people ask you, how did you get to where you were in your career? Well, the basic answer is, I'm not sure everybody, but the basic answer is luck. In my case, my luck is I happened to be around, and Alistair Darling wanted to offer me a job at the end of the last Labour government. I'm not as grateful for him, but it's not just about the chance, but I just learned a lot from him about someone. And he taught me lots of things, but one, politics is about getting things done. It's about a serious business. It's not about games. And that's the danger for some. And that is when you get into, that's why politics loses its reputation. Alistair showed me it's about a serious business, and it's about taking decisions, which are hard. It's about people, he used to take decisions in a very particular way, which was to, yes, listen to everybody, the civil servants, hopefully as advisors, but he would own the decision. And, that isn't always the case in politics. Some people want to dodge the decision, they don't want ownership of it, and they won't feel both sides of the argument, right? Often decisions are not, it's not like there's the good answer and the evil answer. Sometimes it is. But it's not always like that. Sometimes it's really difficult. And in the financial crisis, most ones went in the difficult bucket. And what you want is people that can feel the weight of those decisions, but not be crushed by them. That's what I saw Alistair doing. And I've spent the last 9-10 years, all the work that's in that book, thinking about the state of the country. Doesn't mean I've got all the answers, definitely not, but thinking about it. And in the end, that involves drawing a lot of charts going in the wrong direction. Well, at some point, you keep drawing the charts and you think, how about we try and change the charts, not just...
Yeah, but do you find yourself sort of, having been again in that position of advising ministers or advising governments, feeling, well, ultimately, it's the minister who decides. Therefore, that's what I want to do. That?
Yeah. I mean, broadly, yes. And I don't want to be overly romantic about it, but democracy is a thing. Like, it's a thing. I know it may not be a thing in particularly high repute right now, but, voters choosing who they want, and then those people taking the big decisions. And I know in Westminster circles, particularly in the media, it's quite easy to focus on the advisors because, they're a bit more shadowy. And, they are really important. I don't want to underplay that. But yeah, it is in the end. I'll give you a really concrete example. People always say, whenever things are going badly for a prime minister or a chancellor, I suppose, people say, oh, it's because the advisors around them are rubbish, or, or you'd hear it when Boris Johnson was the prime minister a lot, people being like, oh, if he just got some different people around him, it would all be fine. I mean, no. You don't fix the principles by having better advisors. In the end, it is the senior politicians who are responsible, as it should be.
Let's come back to some of the ideas about how to fix Britain then. I mean, one of the big things, the big challenges you identify is that we haven't invested in Britain for years and years and years. Investment takes money, to state the obvious.
It does.
And there isn't any public money coming out of anywhere right now to sort of spend in huge amounts. Where could it come from? Why would the private sector suddenly say, okay, I know we didn't invest before, but now we're going to?
So overall, we're a low investment country. That's true for the public sector and the private sector. So we're the lowest in the G7 consistently over time. And by investment, we mean investment in kit, buildings, computers to go in them, but we also mean intangibles, science, computers, ideas. Now, other countries sometimes, so Germany also has very low public investment, but it has really high private investment. France has very high public investment. Most places, so it's the combination of the two that makes Britain stand out particularly acutely. And one of the examples of that I give in the book, which is the one that sticks with me most, is reservoirs. So no one talked about water in British politics for the last 20 years, but everybody is now. I'm one of the people that's been poisoned by a swim in a dirty river. As an example of us choosing not to invest in our future. So we basically used to build major reservoirs almost every year in Britain from kind of 1860 odd right the way through to the 1990s. We even used to open them during the war. Now, the last one was in the early 1990s. We haven't opened a single big reservoir since the 1990s. That's 30 years in which the British population has grown by 10 million. We probably needed some more reservoirs. Now, that's just one really visceral example, but it's true right the way across. Now, that's in the private sector now, but it's a regulated utility. The energy sector is the other huge one at the moment. We have underinvested in those sectors, and that's why we have, the chance in some parts of the country of water shortages. It's why we have dirty water. It's why we haven't managed to reduce our dependence on imported gas before the energy crisis that caused the cost of living crisis kicked off. We do have to invest in those things. Why can't we connect anyone to the national grid today? Because we stopped investing in it over the last 20
But why did that happen? If investment is the route to growth, then
it's definitely one of the big ones. Well, that's a good question. So, let's do this in different ways.
People will go, yes, well, we must invest.
In those regulated sectors, it's because we believed our own hype, which is that by privatizing the utilities, we had made them super efficient, and so they were a much better place to sweat the assets than their comparator firms in Europe. And so we didn't need to invest like they were doing because of all this whizzy stuff that was going on. Now, anyone that now knows the water industry knows the only whizzy stuff going on was some investors making a lot of money by loading debt onto water companies and taking it all out in dividends. That was just wrong. That was us telling ourselves that we were brilliant, and we weren't, and it was an easy story to tell because it meant we could keep down water bills, which is fair enough. We want to keep water bills low, but that's the story we told ourselves. And the same applies to a lesser degree to the energy sector, but also to short-termism. There's a really great quote from Nick Clegg back in the early 2010s when he was in the flush of being the new deputy prime minister, saying, oh, well, why would we bother proceeding with this nuclear power plant? None of this will be up and running until the late 2020s anyway. Well, here we are. And what do we now need to do? Build those same nuclear power plants. Yeah, because if people take the short-term decision, don't do the investment, then we're paying the price. But we're paying the price after they've long left the political scene. Now, that's mainly in the public and the regulated sectors. The bit that people have, where I think the evidence is more mixed, but I have my view in the book, is in the private sector. British management is more short-termist, and partly because it doesn't have any pressure from active owners. So unlike in, say, Germany, where you've got family ownership of the firm, or in the US, where you've got like squillionaires who own the firm and are like, could you get on with sorting it out, please? Our managers are much more, they are talking to owners who are much more diffuse. We all own it through our pension funds, but you don't have any idea who you're invested in. You're definitely not going to start putting pressure on the owners of those firms. So there's no top-down pressure on British managers to invest for the long term, but there is short-term pressure to pay some dividends right now. And similarly, there's no upward pressure of the kind you see again in Germany with workers on boards, or in Scandinavia, for example, where workers are partly involved in the corporate governance of the firm and saying, right, what are you doing to make sure this firm is valuable in 15 years, because I'll still be working there. Then neither of those two things exists So we have kind of managers who are more free to respond to the short-term pressure, pay out, not to invest for the longer term.
I mean, the book goes into all sorts of other things: planning, housing,
planning,
tax.
Well, no, planning is important because the second thing I was going to say to you about why investment doesn't happen is just talk to a chief exec about getting stuff built.
Right.
And they just say, what's wrong with you people? I just can't, like, we all know we need this data center. Why can't I just get it built?
Yeah. And that's the thing that really needs to be unlocked. And the government says it will do that,
Well,
but you wonder whether it really will.
Well, on housing, there's already very big changes. You can't just say to local areas, do whatever you want in terms of house building. You have to be clear. The demand is there. It should be for local areas and local people to decide the nature of the housing, the location of the housing, how to do it best, making sure you've got community consent. But the fact of building, you can't just leave to local areas because it's a collective problem. And if one area chooses not to build, it makes the problem bigger for the area next door.
Yeah.
And we've changed that.
But there's a sort of a
But that's in England, remember, by the way. That's an English issue.
Yeah.
Planning's obviously devolved in Wales.
I don't know whether it's a vicious circle or a tension or whatever it is, but you're going to do things that upset people. If you're a bulldozer through planning regulations and all the rest of it, you risk upsetting voters and losing Labour seats. How do you deliver the kind of political stability that you need to actually change Britain for the better, which you would admit isn't going to be done in 4 years? It's going to take at least 2 terms of one government, without risking being booted out because you've upset too many people with big controversial decisions?
So I do hear that argument a lot, and it's and it is true. Some people, development can be unpopular.
I mean, it's not just on planning, is it? I mean, it's on everything. It's whether it's on immigration or the boats, whatever. You've got populists also circling, saying we've got some easy answers to things, and all their answers are really painful.
Yeah, but not. I mean, some of the answers are painful, but I don't think you're giving the public enough, credit. Like, people expect to see us get the basics right. This is not what the book is arguing for. Is not don't. Sometimes people say in politics, right? Where's the one big idea, and it needs to be really radical. And if we do that, it'll fix everything. So for Liz Truss, that is kind of, let's just slash a load of taxes and be big and bold. The left has different versions of that, whether it's a UBI or universal basic income. I take the exact opposite view, which is changing your country involves hundreds of decisions, and it involves knowing where you're aiming for, which should be radical. Inequality down, growth up. That should be your radical objective. Higher investment, but then getting that right isn't about one big decision. That's not how the world works. That's not how any of us live our lives. It is about every day getting up and making the right decisions that move us incrementally in that direction. If you don't like that, well, then you probably shouldn't be in the business of government. You should be in the business of writing books. There are, more zeitgeisty books than this that have one big idea because that's what people like to read. But that isn't how the real world works.
Just seeing as you mentioned it, why do you think a universal basic income is pie in the sky?
Because it would put poverty up.
But we should say what UBI is. This is an idea in which the government would just pay everybody a fixed income that covers the basics.
And sounds like a good idea. There are clearly some advantages in terms of removing some of the kind of means testing in the benefits system that does cause it's difficult to do and it would give people a security of income, and that's obviously desirable. The problem is that any plausible UBI would both be, it would either be too high to be affordable, or it would be too low to stop lots of people falling into poverty. Because when people get to actually proposing one, rather than enjoying writing books about the theory, then what you get to is them saying, well, let's take all the existing benefit spend, which is concentrated amongst poorer households, and give everybody a bit of that, okay? Which means everyone at the bottom has far less than they do now. And because people have very different needs, right? Depending on their housing costs, their number of children, whether they're disabled, if you just give everybody the same, you end up making the poorer households very poor indeed. So in most cases, a UBI would end up meaning we had to put up taxes quite significantly and would still increase poverty. Now, there's then a separate issue, which is my view is it's taking out way too much headspace. This is a thing that was never going to happen. There's no political support for it anywhere amongst the British public, partly for the reasons I've said, which is left-wing people should not be very keen on poverty increasing, and I don't think most of the country wants to see another massive rise in tax to pay for it. But it's taken up a lot of energy. Like, a lot of people spent lots of the last decade debating the idea of a UBI. That's what I call not being serious. That's a country that isn't dealing with its actual problems. Remember, pay was stagnating while everyone was busy writing papers about a UBI. Just get real.
Now, and of course, you wrote this before you were an MP, and and Rachel Reeves is the Chancellor, and she will take all these decisions. But in the book, you do call for things like equalising capital gains tax with income tax, and taxing inheritance more effectively, and unearned wealth, and things like getting rid of the two-child benefit cap. Now, when it comes to it, Rachel Reeves may do some of those things and may not do others. I mean, how do you feel that you're able to sort of adjust to politics in which you have to be part of a team supporting things that you sometimes don't agree with?
Oh, no, that's easy. Look, if you're a massive narcissist, right, then don't be part of a team, and then it's only your ideas that matter, and then, I could have kept writing newspaper columns. Writing a book is definitely an individual exercise. Politics isn't. Nothing meaningfully can you get done on your own in politics, and nor should you. Because it is, as I say, the nature of democracy, why do political parties exist? To aggregate ideas so the public can make a meaningful choice between parties. If it was just about one individual, that would be a bad place to be. So it definitely involves compromise. And I'm, a middle-aged adult. Anyone with kids should know by this point that life is about compromise. That's where you are. And also, so politics is about values, yeah? There's a reason why I'm in the Labour Party. It's about values. But then it's driven in terms of what it does by ideas, right? As you say, I wrote a book before I knew I was going to be running for office. That may not be the most sensible thing to do in the world, but this is me putting out some ideas. There are lots of other people with lots of ideas out there. I'm sure lots of them are very good, but lots of the values are shared, even though people may come to different, conclusions about the individual policies. That is what being an adult is about. And if people can't be like, okay, well, we're going to move forward as a collective, well, as I say, they shouldn't be in politics.
And are you as optimistic about the future of democracy in Britain as you are about the potential for the economy? Because a lot of people are very pessimistic about that.
They are. I think the pessimism, the anti-politics vibe, I think is misplaced because it's missing the point, which is a lot of the anti-politics amongst the public is about us not doing the basics. Like, it's easy to say, oh, it's like, big picture, social media, changing psychologies. No. We're not filling in the potholes. The health service doesn't work, okay? And the taxes have gone up, despite the fact that public services are a disaster. It's time to do the basics right. That is the most important thing to rebuilding faith in politics. I'm knocking on doors this Saturday, but every Saturday, that's what people are raising. They want to know, why their street right in front of them, where the bins aren't getting collected quickly enough or the potholes aren't being filled in. And at one level, people say, oh, that's just local government. And obviously it's not strictly the MP's responsibility. But that is what it takes to rebuild faith in politics. That basic stuff is getting done, that we're doing the foundations. And yeah, for some people, maybe that isn't exciting and glamorous, but that is what needs doing.
And if you could change one thing in the world, wave a magic wand, what would it be?
Well, I think maybe what your point you were just making, which is we need to rebuild the faith that we can make a difference, that people believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and that we're a country heading somewhere. And we're going to find out whether this government can do it. I obviously believe that it can. But if that is achieved, even more than the material individual changes, the individual bits of policy, clearly making sure the NHS is functioning around the country. But if we achieve those micro things, so that it changes the country's mindset again and makes us believe, which we did. Last time Oasis were playing gigs, people believed Britain was getting better. And that is what we're going to get back to.
Torsten Bell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.